Gosh, it has been a robust week in politics. And hey, look, I'm not sure if you got the chance to. I just happened to be sitting around scrolling through news feeds on my iPad Sunday afternoon when they announced that Winston Peters was going to give a State of the Nation address. And I thought, might as well watch it, not doing anything else. One thing I was quite surprised about was the difference between what was actually said and what was reported in the media. And I'm thinking, well, I don't usually watch press conferences like this. I wonder if it's that different all of the time. Joining us on the program now, political commentator and, director of the Democracy Project, Dr. Bryce Edwards. Bryce, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, Marina, kia ora. Nice to talk to you.
Did you watch Sunday afternoon as it all rolled out from, what was it, Palmerston North?
Look, I think like 99.5% of the population, I just saw the coverage in the mainstream media, the 6 o'clock news, and it was certainly colourful. And to see that he was comparing, supposedly, the last Labour government's co-governance policies with Nazi Germany has obviously created a lot of headlines and a lot of angst since.
I was surprised, I mean, having watched it, and I'm not taking political sides here, but I was surprised at the difference between what was actually said and what was reported. And honestly, my first question was, gosh, is that what you got out of that? I didn't actually hear that. But actually mentioning Nazis at all in a political speech, I mean, it's kind of like a red flag or a swastika flag to a bull, really, isn't it? That is the thing that people are going to go for. You would think a seasoned campaigner such as Winston would have realised that.
Oh, look, I think Winston Peters has done incredibly well out of the last 3 or 4 days. And he got lots of media coverage about what he said. As you suggest, it wasn't very accurate. And then he's had lots of coverage from, Luxon's, Prime Minister Chris Luxon's response. And Winston Peters has been on Breakfast TV again this morning defending himself. So I think it actually works out very well for New Zealand First. He always does very well in sort of being the underdog, the victim of, conspiracy theories.
Now, is it unusual in itself? Like, I thought, oh, gosh, I didn't know Deputy Prime Ministers did State of the Nation addresses. I'm not sure whether there's a precedent for it. Was it just, I suppose, literally a photo opportunity, Winston's opportunity to say, hey, here's how I see things, and this is where New Zealand First Party policies fit in with that?
Yeah, I mean, State of the Nation speeches are kind of an American thing that have come into New Zealand politics probably in the last 10 years. And I think they're a good thing where you get a chance for political leaders to talk about where things are at and what's wrong and how they're going to fix them. So there's no rules about who can give them. You could give one tomorrow morning on your show.
Yeah, I mean, Salvation Army do them on an annual basis as well. I mean, as another example. So how are we looking? How could we get better, I suppose?
Yeah, we could do them on a weekly basis. So there's no rules about this, like the budget, which, is done each year. But so I think there's nothing wrong with it, but it was a bit surprising. And it was problematic for a Deputy Prime Minister to be going so hard, not just in terms of all those kind of heightened, terms like Nazi, but also some of the criticisms he made of his own government. And he talked about the fiscal hole that Nicola Willis, his finance minister, is dealing with at the moment, which was quite a heavy critique that you don't normally get. So he's really making waves.
Exactly, making waves, although most of his comments was about opposition parties, quotable lines such as Green Party couldn't run a school tuck shop and various other one-liners such as that. And but hey, talking about the fiscal hole, this is a reality. Something else we've seen politically this week in amongst one-liners from Winston Peters is, if anything, a little bit of a backpedaling from the government, from Nicola Willis in particular, saying, you know what, things are not only worse than we thought, but they're trending in a really negative direction. Some of the things that we promised, we may not be able to deliver, or at least delay the timing of them. I mean, that's one way to set off economic alarm bells, I suppose.
Yeah, and there'll be people sympathetic to that. Clearly, the economy isn't in a good shape, and that's something that this government has inherited. But I'm not sure that they shouldn't have seen this coming.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of debate during the election campaign about how bad the economy was, and about how much difficulty National would have in promising the things that they were promising.
Yeah.
And no. And so, these aren't just criticisms from their opponents, but people, economists, people on the political right
Hmm.
saying, it's going to be very hard to give tax cuts and try and balance the budget, or at least reduce the budget deficit, um, while, yeah, keeping the country going.
Yeah.
So
Essentially.
it does seem that Nicola Willis is going to deliver tax cuts.
Hmm.
She stated it. She's reiterated that that's going to happen. But essentially, they're going to have to borrow money
Yeah.
to do this.
Yeah,
They're
which
going to be doing
seems a
it
little
while
bit
they're,
counterintuitive,
yeah,
really, doesn't it? To
it
borrow
does.
money to pay off your mortgage, as it were, or to
Yeah.
borrow money to reduce your income, which is essentially what's happening in this regard. It seems counterintuitive, but other people would say, "Oh yeah, but it was a promised policy in the election. The political consequences of not doing it may be a lot worse than delaying when we get back in black, as it were."
Yeah, and this is an age-old political, juggling act that politicians have to do. And so they are going to have to let down some people one way or another. They're
Hmm.
going to have to disappoint people. So I would not like to be in Nicola Willis's shoes at the moment, having to draw up this budget. She is inevitably going to have a lot of criticism, whatever she does. But I do think that she'll have a lot of criticism from the political right as well. And
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing now with Winston Peters getting in
Mm.
on the act before the budget's even given,
Yeah.
which is quite strange for someone inside her own cabinet to do that. But I do think I think I should just quickly clarify about that Winston Peters speech,
Yeah.
because he's coming out now, and I think quite rightly, disputing how the media have reported it.
Hmm.
Especially, I mentioned at the start that, there was the report that he compared co-governance to Nazi Germany. He's now pointing out, I think quite correctly, that it wasn't the case
Yeah.
in his speech, and maybe you can clarify. He was talking about one of the Te Pāti Māori MPs allegedly saying that Māori have stronger genetics than
Yeah.
other.
To me, that was evidently what he was saying. It was an attack on Māori Party policies rather than the principle of co-governance. But yeah, it's interesting what people who are there and recording the information, how that can get perhaps misinterpreted. Having said that, though, the media who were gathered at the event, I mean, another one-liner, he said, "Welcome back." To the news media, because they hadn't turned up to his events during the election campaign. But maybe, I don't know, maybe they were too busy licking their wounds to pay attention to what he was saying, because he was very, very critical of the news media. For I think possibly up to 50% of what he said was aimed at the news media, and it wasn't kind, let's say.
Well, I mean, Peters has always been a bit prickly
Hmm.
with the media, but he seems to have really dialed it up a notch. And so, when he was appointed Deputy Prime Minister, in the first speech he gave, he talked about some sort of war on the media,
Yep.
going to war with the media, and he's really living up to that. And so, yes, he was on Breakfast TV this morning, again, saying very strong things about the media being biased, being paid off by the last government and things like that. So it is quite an extraordinary war, and I don't think it's particularly good for anyone, this war. I don't think it's good for the media,
Yeah.
because I think they are being drawn into it, and they are not covering him accurately as a response, which isn't what they should be doing.
Exactly. In some ways, it's proving
They
his
should
point
be,
in that regard.
yeah, they are. So they should be turning their other cheek. They should be continuing to report properly, and yeah, it seems they're not. So that just makes his lines have a bit more power, I think.
Exactly, and I mean, it is an interesting scenario, because I mean, the news media were saying, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't report what this guy says," but hey, given how it's unfolded, he seems to be the top political topic this week, even though they says, well, we just don't want to give the guy any oxygen in that regard. I mean, interesting stuff. Hey, just quickly
Absolutely.
on this one, we're just about out of time, but an interesting article looking at, public surveys in particular. Survey says, that's the Family Feud line, isn't it? But is this something which is politically useful, or is this just researchers for lobbyists, in your opinion?
No, these surveys are always interesting to see, not what the media are saying, not what the politicians are saying, but what the public's saying. And so we see the party vote, opinion polls coming out every few weeks. And I think they're useful, and they show that National and the other parties in government are pretty much stable. They're not really moving around much. But an interesting one came out yesterday from the polling firm Ipsos. They asked 1,000 people, overall, how would you rate the government for its job in the last 6 months from 0 to 10?
Yeah.
And the average mark was only 4.6.
Wow.
So I was quite surprised by this, and it really does mean that if this research is robust, which I think it is, that this government is really not doing any better than the last one in terms of public perception.
Yeah.
But I'd note that this poll did take place kind of towards the end of February, when the government was mired in a lot of, stuff about treaty principles bill, and maybe that was just very bad timing for them.
And hey, there's a difference between dismantling the previous government's policies and actually pushing ahead with some of your policies, which is something we've seen in the last few weeks. Be interesting to see whether or not this week's discussion on the state of the nation and the reporting of that causes another blip in the public opinion polls. Bryce, thank you for your comments, your insight. Thanks for joining us again.
Cheers, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.